This is the most important information in the Western world at this moment in history. Dare I say it? And this is the evidence, right? If you go and deliver leaflets in the UK, broadly speaking, and arguably anywhere in a Western city, you deliver 5,000 leaflets. Most of the people that are going to get it aren't bothered, right? Well, they're so repressed, they're not going to respond. But that 1% of people, right, 5,000 leaflets, maybe 10,000 people look at it, right? 30 to 50 people arrive at a talk. These are the people that are going to change the regime. Right? These are the lone wolves. And this is the key thing. 4 people will be prepared to be arrested, engaged in civil disobedience. 2 people will be prepared to go to prison. So here we are. This is the most important part of this talk. Go and do the maths. Right? In most Western democracies, if say 3,000 people are arrested, then you'll get legislative change, right? In most Western democracies, if 300-400 people go to prison, you'll get legislative change.
You have just been presented with the appealing myth that all you need to do is print enough pamphlets to motivate enough people to get themselves arrested to achieve legislative change in any Western democracy. And we are even given a precise ratio between the number of pamphlets to be printed, the number of people who go to prison, and you can crunch the numbers and do the math for just how many million pamphlets this would take. Challenge yourself. Think this through for a political set of demands, an ideological movement that you have no sympathy with whatsoever. In every Western country, there are some people who would prefer to have Sharia law. They're not afraid to go to prison for it. It's a minority. But they're a very vocal, very well-organized minority. In Paris, in Berlin, in New York, in California, there are passionate, devout members of the Muslim faith who would prefer to be under Sharia law or some kind of Muslim majority government. Do they believe that if just 3,000 of them go to prison, it'll bring about their desired legislative change?
If you look today in Britain, it's capitalism, secularism, freedom, liberty cannot provide the solutions for people.
So at a time like this, it's actually quite important for Muslims to vote, especially with the sort of rise of Islamophobia.
Voting for a legislator instead of God, it is the greater evil among, that is the greatest evil. Voting itself, it is the greatest crime of all against God. Much worse than all of the crimes that this government are doing against the Muslims, the people who are behind bars without trial.
I don't know where you stand on the abortion issue. I've made many YouTube videos discussing it from many different angles. Do you have any doubt in your mind that in the United States of America, that in England, that in France, there are 3,000 people in each of those countries who aren't just willing to print pamphlets, but who are willing to be arrested, who are willing to go to prison to change the laws on abortion? You know what? You can say it both ways. There are people willing to go to jail to make abortion illegal, and there are people willing to go to jail to make abortion much more readily available. In all of these Western countries, why is it that they don't believe that 5,000 pamphlets or 3,000 people in prison will accomplish that legislative change? And haven't they already tried it? Aren't they engaged in these sorts of methods right now? Is it really a purely hypothetical question we're asking? Or is this something that has, in our times, within our lives, already been tried, tested, pushed to its limits, and utterly debunked? This YouTube video is in part a political critique of a particular leader, of a particular movement, of a particular ideological tendency in our times. But as with the vast majority of my videos, it also provides a more general sort of education in how to use your mind to destroy the ready-made meanings that are presented to you in our society, in our culture, on the internet, on television, on the radio, in the newspapers. One of the most fundamental functions of the human mind is to tear apart complex ideas into their constituent parts, to see the cracks in the facade of the appealing image presented to us by ideologues, whether those be radical dissidents or whether those be members of the establishment. How many people in the United States of America are willing to not just print pamphlets on paper, but go to jail to support the state of Israel? And how many are willing to not just print pamphlets, but go to jail because of their opposition to the state of Israel, one way or another, whether they be anti-Semitic or pro-Palestinian or part of the left-wing BDS movement? There's all kinds of different voices in that chorus. You think there's any shortage? You think it's fewer than 3,000 people? You see how such an appealing illusion starts to fall apart. But he doesn't have to convince you and I. He's only trying to convince a tiny minority of the audience that he refers to as lone wolves.
These are the people that are going to change the regime. Right? These are the lone wolves.
He knows that his words only have to make sense to a tiny minority of desperate people to bring about the outcomes that he's really seeking.
Changing history, changing the world in 6 months is all about disruption plus numbers. The situation is you've got your 5 people, and the standard model that's happening in the Western world at the moment, and it's a little bit speculative, but you know, it's a robust potentiality, as they say, right? You've got your 5 people. Your 5 people, they go and do an extended hunger strike, or they go and paint on a building or block a motorway, and it's filmed. And they go to prison for a week, 2 weeks. That's step 1. And beforehand, they make the videos about it. And there's loads of detail in this point, right? And it goes on social media, and 20,000 people watch it. And then they come out. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to go and have a holiday. No, they're doing a job. You're in prison, you come out, you're onto the job. What is the job? You're then onto your tour, right? You know, Martin Luther King used to do like five speeches a day. That's how you change history. You don't go, oh, I'm off to recover now. It's like, that's how you change history. You know, have 2 days off and then you're out around the country doing a tour, talking to people, okay? And people go, oh my God, this person's gone to prison. Here's a pathway to actual action. I'll do it as well. And they sign up. So you go again, right? 8 weeks later, note the time. Not like 4 months later, not in 2 weeks, right? You go, once you've got those 50 people. The 50 people go to prison. If 50 people go to prison in this country, right? Newspaper people have said it'll be on the front page. It's major. Right? This isn't a fetishization of prison, by the way, right? This is causing disruption, putting the authorities in a dilemma, and they go, okay, we're going to take this disruption and give them loads of publicity, or we put them in prison and we give them lots of publicity. It's a win-win. Non-violence, properly designed, is always a win-win. So there's 50 people going to prison, and you know what happens next, right? This is non-linearity. They're out, proactively designed civil resistance. This is the heart of this video's proposition, right? You've got your 5 people, you've got your 50 people. The 50 people go to prison. They come out. They all do 20 meetings each in 4 weeks. That produces your massive takeoff, right? Your moment where you're going to get 1,000 people prepared to block the motorways, block the infrastructure, whatever it is, and they're prepared to go to prison.
We are now living through the last few months of 2021. Do you think there were fewer than 3,000 people willing to go to prison to overturn the election of Joe Biden and instead install Donald Trump? How many people on January 6th in Washington, D.C. were willing to go to prison to change history with nonviolent methods by this very same definition of nonviolence? And what were the real outcomes of their struggle in the months since then? How many thousand people have been willing to go to prison over the vaccination issue? And how well organized and well funded are they? Any of these groups. Do you think vegans are as well organized and well funded as the crazy abortion people? Do you think they ever will be? Do you think ecologists will ever have the sense of mission and purpose, motivation that we saw shine so brightly during the year 2020 in response to the brutal killing of George Floyd in broad daylight on videotape with witnesses? Do you think there were fewer than 3,000 people willing to go to jail when they were demanding fundamental social, political, legal change after the police killed George Floyd just in the year 2020? Did anyone even need to print pamphlets? The response in all these examples, it was so visceral, it was so immediate, it was so extreme, and it mobilized not hundreds of people, not dozens of people, not thousands. We're talking about tens of thousands or millions of people rising up around the world and demanding change. And yes, non-violently, by this very strange definition of nonviolence that really includes quite a considerable amount of violence when you think about it. If we can't say that this ideology has been discredited, if we can't say that this methodology has proven to us all that it does not work now, then when? The pattern that I see is that one demagogue after another rises up preaching nonviolence, achieves absolutely none of his or her outcomes, none of the legal, legislative, political changes that are demanded. But what they do achieve is their own personal wealth and fame. And as soon as they are caked out in the parlance of our times, like the leaders of Black Lives Matter, suddenly they seem a lot less interested in leading a movement of radical dissonance. Suddenly, they seem very highly motivated indeed to become members of the establishment instead of railing against it. That, for me, is the lesson of history. And I think if I were going to foretell the future, 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 5 years from now, that's the future I foretell for the leaders of Extinction Rebellion, such as Roger Hallam, that you've just seen on your screen, they will go on to the same kind of comfortable life as the leaders of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and so many other once radical movements that have come and gone, of being invited occasionally to appear on the news as a talking head to give their, esteemed opinion on the issues of the day. Well, they've built up for themselves a comfortable bank account, a retirement fund, and a perpetual position on a tour, on a speaking circuit that never ends. What they have secured for themselves is money, fame, power, respect, and sex, not necessarily in that order. Once they've got that, we see just how little radicalism is left in them. And the funny thing is, it's you and I who get to choose. We get to choose our leaders. Whereas the leaders of this world, they don't get to choose their followers. Roger Hallam puts this message out there, and he has no idea what kind of stupid, malevolent people are going to take those orders and how they're going to interpret them and how they're going to apply them and how many people are going to die and what the consequences will be. We get to choose our leaders. They don't get to choose us, and that's why in politics, nobody knows what will happen next. Maybe we can practice